Well, I've got a few minutes with you to hopefully really stir up some thoughts. My role is, and it's one I always enjoy, it's agent provocateur. We're not going to have time to go deeply into things. That's for more discussion the rest of the today and tomorrow, and then hopefully back with your teams. What I want to talk about today is disruptive innovation, the future of senior care and healthcare. And the point here is, I'm a longtime student of Clay Christensen, Harvard Business School professor, sort of the father of modern thinking about innovation. And he distinguishes between continuous innovation and disruptive innovation. One's not good and the other bad, but continuous innovation is doing what we all do in our businesses every day. It's doing things better. It's sales and marketing better. It's better design. It's improving continually. But disruptive innovation is doing things differently. And even more fundamentally, is thinking in a whole new way about the customer and meeting the needs of the customer. And oftentimes with disruptive innovation, it comes from outside a sector because the sector has tunnel vision and has a very tough time kind of seeing things in a new way. So part of what I want to do in the few minutes I have with you this morning is suggest some ways in which we may just need to be seeing things in a new way in order to anticipate the future rather than, as we often do in this industry, catch up with the past. So we want to be anticipating the future. Now, in a time of disruptive innovation, and my thesis is that we're entering a period that's going to be dominated. Still be continuous innovation going on throughout the whole time. And this is a challenge for any established company because you got to do both. And it's not like you forget one and just do the other. But I think we're entering a period, a decade of disruptive innovation. And in such a time, there will be, because of this major disruption, there'll be big winners and big losers. There'll be companies going out of business and other companies that have anticipated the future and are able to seize enormous growth opportunities, partly because they're thinking differently about the market and about the customer. So, disruptive innovation, I don't want to spend much time on it because there isn't time to do that. But just the classic example used is Blockbuster and Netflix. The idea is digital, brought to Blockbuster. They said no, and they became history, and Netflix went on from there. More current example is autonomous vehicle technology in Waymo. The original folks that really developed and tested on the highways of Arizona autonomous self-driving vehicles, when they were ready to go into production, knew they didn't know much about automobile production. So they went to Detroit, logical place to go. And the folks at the big three said, yeah, we'll spend a little time and a little money on it, but fundamentally understand our customers are into the driving experience. The driving experience. And because of that, we just don't see this ever making major traction. Fast forward, they go to the big five, a company called Alphabet has some interest, Waymo gets created, and Waymo is considered by most analysts to have a market value greater than any of the big three and is expected within the next 36 months to have a market value that will exceed the total market value of all the big three automakers. That's called being disrupted in your own market that you've dominated because you didn't see what was coming and you didn't think differently. You didn't think differently about how to meet the needs of the customer. So in that time, as I said, there'll be big winners in this time. I think big winners and big losers. And I think one of the challenges here is in a time of disruptive innovation, you want to be a disruptor and not the disrupted, because in business, that means you go out of business. Sometimes it's slow, and it's a slow death. Other times it's fast, and overnight, you lose your market and your market share. So where are we today? Where we are today in many ways, and remember, this is all, This is not hyperbole, but I'm deliberately saying things in a way to make sure at 8 a.m. in the morning after a wonderful night last night, you're actually going, oh, did he just say that? So in many ways, our product today, a product designed for the greatest generation, and developed and sort of fine-tuned through continuous innovation over the last 30 years. And today, much of assisted living, independent living, memory care, is basically everyone doing the same thing while desperately trying to say, I'm different because I have these amenities. I have these little these little things that the market's gonna love me because I do this extra little amenity, this extra little bells and whistles. But basically, everyone's working off the same paradigm or looking at the same lens. And one of my key takeaways for you this morning is you can't do things differently unless you reframe, unless you have a different lens, a different paradigm, a different perspective. And I would say fundamentally it starts in 4 areas. We have to reframe how we think about aging. We have to reframe how we think about age. We have to reframe how we think about health. And lastly, we have to reframe how we think about senior care. 4 things that I would argue are totally changing in terms of how we need to be thinking about them and how society over time is going to come to think about them. So, to summarize my view of the future in terms of the opportunities, I'm unbelievably bullish about the opportunities out there. The demand's going to be enormous. But I'm also really bearish about the ability of the majority of the companies out there to adapt and to make the changes they're going to make to be successful. Bullish on the opportunities, bullish on the potential market, bearish on the ability of many companies out there to pivot, to make the changes, to see things in a different way. Now, having said this passionately, I always love this Bill Gates quote because I think it's a good dose of reality. We always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years and underestimate the change that will occur in the next 10. What's he saying? What he's saying is, for instance, what happened in the skilled nursing sector in 2014? They thought value-based payments were going to happen overnight. And many leading companies pivoted to value-based care. Guess what? It didn't happen. They were still getting paid overwhelmingly in a fee-for-service model. And they were literally out over the tips of their skis or whatever picture you want to use. They overestimated the amount of change that was going to happen immediately. That's happened for many companies with the boomers are coming, a phrase I've heard ever since I first got into this industry. And, the oldest boomer now is 73. And the boomer influence has to be seen more in terms of what they wanted for their parents and what they've learned about what they want for themselves because of what they don't like about what they see of their parents' notion of retirement and of aging. So when we talk about, so I love this, but at the same time, underestimating the change that will occur in the next 10. So this is the classic kind of think about your leadership team. Are you a leadership team that rushes in with the latest thing you heard at the latest conference you went to and said, oh, boy, we've got to do it all differently. We're doing it all wrong. All right, I want everybody on the leadership team, 8 a.m. Monday morning, I'm sending out an email Sunday night. I heard this guy at this conference. It's revolutionary. It's going to change all we do. And it's all going to happen overnight. And you know what? Continuous innovation gets totally forgotten. There's this sense that this disruption is going to happen right away. And there are a lot of naysayers who don't believe that, but more importantly, it doesn't happen that way. But then on the other hand, do you have a leadership team, or are you prone to, oh, well, I can just sit back. Nothing fundamentally is going to change for a long time. And I can kind of wait until all these things, all these exciting disruptive forces, most of which won't really make any impact. I can kind of just sit back and wait for 5 or 10 years and then see what of all that has actually materialized to actually really be different about our sector, and then I can make the adjustments. So it's sort of two extremes. I'm arguing that either one is going to put you in a perilous position in our industry for the next decade. And I think the balance of this quote is really important, but just as important is understand your leadership team. Understand kind of where are you more prone, because you may, as a leader, then have to lean slightly the other way from whichever way your leadership team leads. So, I talked about reframing. What do I mean by reframing? Just really briefly. Reframing aging. We can no longer, and we need to be the ones, no longer thinking about aging as a disease that you catch, that's terminal and that's terrible. And so you have anti-aging creams and anti-aging this and anti-aging this, as though aging is an unmitigated disaster. Hence the language, which lots of people use, silver tsunami. Who ever heard of anything good coming out of a tsunami? It's an unmitigated disaster. Every time we use that phrase, and I want to thank Trish here for the first one to challenge me about the use of that phrase. Every time we use that phrase, we're saying that the aging of our society is an unmitigated disaster, waiting to hit, like a tsunami, our society. And we do it ourselves in this industry. We have to reframe. Aging is a stage of life. Like all stages of life, it has great things about it, and it has some things that aren't so great about it. So yes, I'm aware more of the physical limitations I have. So I go out and get a new knee, and I'm so excited that I go dancing, which I've been waiting to do for a long time, and then I tweak my Achilles. And it stinks. But at the same time, I've never felt more intellectually alive, and I've never felt more that I'm close to wisdom, because I can take my experience and I can take my knowledge and I can combine them to getting something that approximates. My wife would say, hold on, Bob, but gets close to some actual wisdom. And also perspective. I have perspective as I turn 70 that I didn't have when I was 18, and I didn't have when I was 35. So reframing how we think about aging, but also age. And again, we do this. How do we think about age? Are we thinking about of 55 or 60 or 65 as an age where you're beginning to go into an inevitable period of decline that cannot be reversed? Or are we thinking instead about a longevity bonus, about the fact that in the 20th century we gained 30 years in average life expectancy, but that none of our thinking about retirement, about aging, reflects that bonus of those 30 years? And so how do we think about age? Do we think about age 75 as kind of this pivotal age after which your value to contribute to society goes down significantly? Or do we look at the incredible opportunities and value to our society of engaging folks who are now indeed having longer age spans, and hopefully, with the work that all of you do in this room, also a health span, a wellness span that matches as much as possible the age span. Because it's true, in the old paradigm, if you had age span, but then you don't have health span and you don't have wealth span, it's not that attractive. And so it's more than just age span. So we can't celebrate age span, but we've got to recognize the reality of it. And mostly as a society, are thinking about retirement, are thinking about planning for the future, are thinking about careers. Last week I gave a talk to university administrators. And I said, for those of you decrying the fact that there's more and more focus on skills and less interest in humanities and liberal arts, I got news for you. Your largest growing population of folks interested in the humanities and the liberal arts is going to be the 55 plus population. You're going to be doing skill sets for people who are 18 and 25. But you're going to be, as folks seek to refire and retool what they're going to do next at 55 and 65 and 75, you're going to have enormous opportunities with liberal arts and humanities. So, reframing aging, health. Understanding that health, and this has only happened really in the last 3 years, that health does not equal health care. We've always thought of health being a function driven almost exclusively by health care. Now we understand that the quality and the access and so forth you have to health care, medical care, accounts for about 10% of your overall health and well-being. So with that understanding, what does that mean? Just think about this for a moment. Arnie Whitman said at one of our conferences at one point, we were having a discussion about post-acute care, and Arnie said, well, post-acute care has always had a seat in healthcare at the kids' table. And I followed up and said, yes, and senior care has not even been at the table. But that was visualizing health as equaling healthcare. And so you have a health care distribution system. And in that system, we weren't seen as relevant. We were irrelevant. Now, when health instead is setting an environment, it's social determinants, it's engagement, it's sense of purpose, it's antidotes to loneliness, it's human connection. We jump from being irrelevant to being actually at the center of the universe, of how, for older Americans, we are going to enable them to have health and wellness. And so, again, that's a radical change. It's underway. It hasn't happened totally, but I'm assuming all of you want to be ahead of the curve and not behind it. So, lastly, reframing senior care. Why? Well, first of all, senior to boomers is their parents' notion of retirement and aging, and they don't want, for the most part, anything to do with it. Secondly, senior care is inherently, I would argue, a condescending, patronizing concept, particularly for women, and as our recent study has showed, we're actually going to be, that's going to be even more, they're going to be even more dominant in that population. And you know, there's infant care, there's toddler care, then there's adult day care, then there's senior care. Well, that kind of dependency model, that's not going to fly in the future. For a generation of women who, among other things, are the ones that drove assisted living, because in the early 90s they were in the workforce in unprecedented numbers, and then their mom or their mother-in-law needed care, and they went and visited a local nursing home, and they said, I could never live with myself if I put mom here, but I don't want to give up my job. And suddenly, thanks to Karen Brown Wilson and Paul and Terry Claassen and others, they visited this place, this mansion with carpet and Edwardian furniture and a gorgeous curved staircase and the huge chandelier. The staircase you'd never want the residents to use. But why was that significant? They weren't marketing to the resident. They were marketing to the guilt of the adult daughter. And she loved it. And she said, now I can go back to work and I don't have to feel guilty that I've moved mom here. But those women who fought for rights in the workforce, rights to their bodies and so forth, are they going to accept the dependency, condescending model that basically says, you know, we're here to enable you to be further dependent upon us? I don't think so. I just don't think that model's going to fly in the future. So I need to move on, or else Michael will be concerned. So, but we need to I could give you 8 other examples of terms that if we don't change our thinking, and it starts with us, we're not going to deliver a different product if we're still thinking this way about age, about aging, about health, about senior care. We have to change ourselves. One of the things that means, and we're doing this examination at NIC, Are you ageist even in the combination in your own workforce? What are your attitudes towards, are you using the experience of elders in your own workforce? Those of us, I assume most all of us, that are serving this market. How are you getting the wisdom and the insights and the understanding of what our actual customers really want? So, I'm going to close with 4 key concepts quickly, a couple of drivers, and then lastly 4 success factors. 4 key concepts. Home. Basically, you cannot understand the future of healthcare in America, and you cannot understand, I think, the future of what will happen in terms of the opportunities, but also the challenges of our industry, unless you understand the drive to home. And the drive to home means, put one way, that consumers will demand, technology will enable, and payers will pay for. Increasingly, the traditional healthcare being brought to the home rather than taking especially the frail senior or the disabled to the healthcare center. So you see just an explosion of that model. Secondly, it's with the understanding that in the home, and that home includes our communities, in the home there are ways to influence health, not just healthcare. There's ways to influence behavior. There's ways to influence all the social determinants of health that now are seen as those social determinants outside of genetics and family history and quality of medical care account for 60% of the factors that have to do ultimately with quality of life. So that drive to home. Secondly, value. Now value, I've often said, and I do believe it, value is fears about costs cloaked in value. But our desire is we use those fears to still actually end up with real value. But what I mean by that is, I think part of the misunderstanding in terms of the Gates quote of how quickly value-based care would move is assuming that everyone was suddenly really into value for the customer. And we're not there. The switch in value was a switch in value for those at the top of the healthcare distribution food chain, namely hospitals and doctors, particularly specialists, to now value is being examined through the lens of the payer, and particularly the lens of the payer who holds that capitated risk for healthcare lives that's been deliberately farmed out by a government entity, either at the federal level, CMS, or at the state level, for states for their Medicaid budget. Why? Because they're scared to death, whichever party they're from. They're scared to death as the sort of landing ramp gets shorter between now and the time when those dollars are going to eat up every discretionary dollar and more in their state budgets and in the federal budget. And there's a panic there. And so what the governments are trying to do is capitate their risk by offloading it to managed care companies and giving them incredible flexibility to incentivize behavior. You can either have government mandated changes in behavior. I don't think we're returning to that anytime soon. Or you can give that type of flexibility or power to those who are holding the financial risk, the insurance companies. So, but value ultimately is, with this past year, for the first time, 50% of the revenues of major insurers came from government entities. What do I mean by that? That means that Medicare and Medicaid suddenly are now at and slightly above the revenue coming from the traditional employer plans. And that means they are much more focused, and that's seen as the largest growth area for them. And what happens with Haven, the Amazon, JP Morgan, Berkshire Hathaway, that has the potential to be enormously disruptive too. But value is in the eyes of the behavior, particularly the managed care provider, and also the government entities, particularly CMS. And this focus then on value-based care I think leads next to the third key concept for this next decade of partnership. And that is, because now you're going to be focused and need to be focused on what's the setting and how do I coordinate with other settings so that I'm doing all the things that maximize health at the right time, in the right place, at the lowest cost. And very few systems or entities are going to have all the skill sets and all the settings needed. And that means partnerships. I think about Kevin last night with one of his first points about, I wanted to do it all on my own. I wanted to control it. And suddenly realized he could have a lot greater value if he started to partner. And it opened up it re-energized his career. But with partnerships, alignment is critical, absolutely critical. For instance, if we're going to partner and we don't share a common data set, the partnership won't work. Secondly, if we're going to partner and we have a common data set, but we haven't agreed on what's important to capture in that data set, so what the frontline caregiver in the assisted living community and what the primary care doc and the nurse practitioner, what they each consider important, they can quickly see in the notes. If you don't have that, it won't work. So partnerships, vertical integration, strange bedfellows, partnerships like we would never have conceived of before are increasingly becoming commonplace. Because everyone's, put simply, we're in a massive search as we switch from healthcare to health on what's the distribution system that'll enable us to maximize health and restrain costs. And increasingly, what people are coming to the realization is that that's not a traditional healthcare delivery system, that they have to go outside of healthcare delivery if they want to have a system that will incentivize and maximize health. So why, several months ago, the Chief Strategy Officer of Kaiser was on the same stage with the Chief Strategy Officer of Best Buy and the founder and CEO of Great Call, now a Best Buy company. And as they announced their partnership, the Chief Strategy Officer from Kaiser said, we were looking for a distribution system that we thought could truly affect the behavior of our plan members. We're increasingly believing that's not within a traditional healthcare distribution model. So why are CVS and Walgreens each touting their new healthcare delivery chassis? And everyone's in a race to see, do they have, whether they're retailers, whether they're in pharmacy, whether they're Amazon, do they have the ability to have the new, it's not healthcare delivery system, it's really the new health delivery system. So, lastly, risk. You will not, the ability to play in this future world is the ability to either take risk or partner with people who are at risk. And that means data, that means shareable data, and without good data and shareable data and measurable data across care settings, you're flying blind. And you're putting your whole business enterprise at risk. But that data is the entry point to be able to take risk and be in the most meaningful partnerships of the future. ACOs that don't have downside risk haven't worked. But where there's downside risk, where people really are at risk, that's where you start to see changes in behavior. Until that time, hospital executives will say, as one said to me, I don't like the optics of a readmission penalty, but I'll take that over an empty bed penalty any day of the week. Because an empty bed penalty for me is also fixed capital equipment that I spent millions on. And that equipment all gets used when somebody's in the hospital 3 to 5 days. It sits unused and unmovable when they're not there. And so in a candid off-the-record discussion with a group of healthcare executives, they all agreed. And the way they described it to me is there's a war going on now in the corporate offices, the C-suite of many health systems, between the chief strategy officer who's saying, the future is the retailization of healthcare. We gotta get out into the community. We gotta take our services out there. And the chief financial officer saying, are you nuts? Do you realize the dollars we have sunk in this real estate? Do you realize how much we have sunk in all of our fixed equipment? That's suicide. And you see this tension playing out again and again. And if you're seeking to partner in a local market, you better understand that tension. And you better understand where that C-suite is on this particular issue. 4 drivers, not going to have the time to go over them all. I call these the consumer driver, the technology driver, the policy driver, and the capital driver. But simplifying this, I think, and I'm just going to focus on the first and the third. The longevity revolution, that consumer driver, that's being driven by what I call the young old. Those are the boomers and the sort of second half of the cohort of the silent generation. They're driving it because of values and lifestyle, which are very, very different, combined with attitude, which is very in your face. The hell, I'll accept that. I want this. Give it to me. I'm used to having the market give me what I want. And I am not my parent. I'm not going to accept this stuff you give me. And you say I should be satisfied with this. This is my reward for being part of the greatest generation. Remember, for the greatest generation, the defining experience was the war. World War II, Korean War. Gave rise to the phrase, 3 hots in a cot. Defining experience for the boomers, college. They went in unprecedented numbers. 3 hots in a cot had a slightly different understanding in college, and we won't go into that. So, the boomers, look at this in generational or sort of 30-year increments. In the 60s, hell no, we won't go. In the 90s, hell no, we won't put mom in a nursing home. I think in the 2020s, hell no, we won't accept your notion of retirement, of being farmed out to the pasture. We won't accept your notion of aging, that really our productive life is over and that we're no longer movers and shakers. Boomers will believe they're movers and shakers until you literally bury them. They are always going to feel themselves as movers and shakers. And what does that mean? It means, for instance, in communities that I've visited where I've literally been with staff and sit down in a meal or met a resident in the hallway, and the resident is actually referred to in their presence in the past tense. Julie used to be such and such. John used to do this. And they're described in the past tense. Well, you talk about feeling invisible. When someone is talking to you and you're in the past tense, that's being invisible. I got news for you. Boomers aren't going to be invisible. They are absolutely not going to be invisible. And that's going to shake up our communities in a wonderful way, I think. So, redefining retirement for themselves. What does that look like? Simply, I call the old view of retirement the declinist view. That to retire, to disappear, to go away, to disengage. You literally disengage and connect. You might be cut off from the office intranet. You may no longer have your office email address. You begin an inevitable conveyor belt period of decline that all ends with the ultimate disappearing act, which is death. And particularly, we see the negative impact upon this of older women, who oftentimes report that they basically feel invisible. That's a huge indictment on us as a society, but us also as providers. So in this model, retirement is a statement, I'm finished, I'm done. Now I hope I have a few years to enjoy my bucket list. It's the golden years of the twilight years. What are the values? This is important. Safety, security, and comfort. That led to a model that was separated from basically age-segregated ghettos. I don't think that'll fly with boomers. It's a dependency model. All the language reflects that dependency model. We're here to care for you. But the sense is, you know, it's all about what we're doing for you. It's not a two-way street. It will be a two-way street in the future. So in this model, again, aging is a disease that you catch. You try and avoid, you try and postpone as long as you can. Future view of retirement, I call it the engagement model, the E word. It's about Reboot, which is one book, What to Do When Your Career is Over and Your Life Isn't. It's about engagement, enrichment, experience, enjoyment. What do I do next? So my staff knew when I stepped out of CEO role of NIC, they better not have a retirement party for me. So they had a transition party. Because at retirement parties, you're saying, I'm finished, I'm done. At a transition party, you announce with excitement what you're going to do next. You're rebooting, or the phrase I love, you're refiring. A little deliberate play on the idea of being fired. You are refiring passions. You're refiring purpose. You're refiring social connections. You're refiring your role in human community. I think that's exciting. I think our country needs that. We also know it's best for people's health. It's best for our social fabric, especially at this time. Our GDP, our workforce needs it, and so forth. So the values for this cohort: engagement, connection, enrichment. It's about being integrated with. It's an empowerment model. It's boomer power. I want to be where the action is. I want to continue to be an influencer. So on this, there's one key thing here. Driven by cost concerns, the changing role of the acute care hospital. Let me sum it up this way. I call the future of what's happening with health care the peri-acute model. The peri-acute model is where you have a moat around the acute care hospital. And the goal of your health model is to do everything you can to keep your residents from ever having to cross that moat. Because when they cross that moat, bad things happen. They go there because of UTI. They have a fall. They break a hip. It begins a period usually of unfortunate but very real decline. So this is just what drives health, the challenge and the opportunity. Let me put it this way. There is a growing recognition after 3 years of attending the leading pop health conference in this country. This past spring, we finally were able to convince the organizers to have a series of panels on the role of senior housing and senior care. And there's beginning to be a recognition. For instance, I recently interviewed, well, it was a year ago, a United Health executive, and we were having this conversation, and he said, I'd give anything to have my eyes on our plan members 24/7. And I said, well, I work with a lot of organizations that have their eyes on your plan members 24/7. We really should talk. And so, on any given day, we house 2.5 to 3 million elders who are predominantly have multiple chronic conditions, have one or more ADL needs, and they're either in that high-need, high-risk group, or they're one incident, one fall, one UTI infection away from being high risk and high cost. So we're at the epicenter now of relevance to the health and wellness and cost debate going on. Two overall impacts of this disruptive innovation: major disruption of established business models, significant convergence. It's not time to focus on that now. This you might just be interested in. This is all the ways our current senior care ecosystem, this we worked on with Clay Christensen's consulting firm InnoSight to develop this after a lot of interviews sort of across the entire healthcare continuum. All the ways in which our current system fails our residents. Values created when care silos break down. That in this Venn diagram, it's that overlapping area there. That's where real value is created for our residents. When we bring the housing component, the healthcare component, and the support for daily living components, and we integrate them in an integrated model for health and wellness delivery. One of the things that doesn't mean, there's a lot of popularity now about managing transitions, making sure the data, the meds go from one setting to another. That, if we continue to have differing silos, each with their own expertise, competing on the care of our residents, we won't have integrated, cost-effective, good outcomes care for seniors. Why do I say that? Let me put it this way. What I see happening with healthcare professionals in each setting is, in each setting, the professionals, the hospitalist, the SNFist, the medical doctor for the assisted living, in each setting, And this is human nature. But each setting, the professional, in a sense, has to own his or her turf by peeing on it. And they pee on it by basically saying, I don't know why that doctor in the hospital put you on those meds. Or I don't know what that doctor in the skilled nursing facility, whom I have no respect for as someone on the staff of a major hospital, why in the world they're recommending. And so basically it becomes a competition of experts. It's the antithesis of coordinated care. That won't be solved by just having healthcare records and medications transfer from one setting to another. It's much deeper than that. So 2 options. That shouldn't say no healthcare on site. It should say no caregivers on site. This first one, I hope you'll pay attention to. It's starting to get a little press. Kai, who's going to be on the panel here momentarily, has talked about this too. There's a lot of health plans are waking up to our industry, but they're frustrated with our industry. They're sick and tired of hearing from our industry, but we don't do healthcare. And we're afraid of getting engaged in healthcare. So insurance plans are either going to incentivize choices or they're going to come in and start buying and creating their own platforms. Because they're holding the risk and we're serving the population, which is the greatest cost. Something's going to happen there. For high-end elder care, this is just a warning. For all of you that love the high-end space, you won't get away with failing on the premise and the promise to the adult daughter in the future. What I mean by that is the adult daughter's not going to hand you $6,000 and $8,000 and then still get the call at 2 a.m. that mom's just been put into the ambulance to go to the ER. No staff member went with her. Yes, we realize you're 200 miles or even 5 miles away and it's 2 a.m. That won't fly in the future. You will have to get a hold of your hospitalization rates and your ER usage, if for no other reason than the adult daughter is no longer going to use you. If you promise that she doesn't have to worry anymore, but then she ends up being the expert. She's got to figure out Medicare Advantage. She's got to coordinate all the different care providers and get them communicating. You got to replace them. So, my last slide, 4 success factors for the future. 1, winning culture. For all I've said, which affects strategy, you can have a great strategy. You can get financing with a phone call. You can develop strategy in a weekend or a retreat. Culture takes years. There are going to be a lot of companies 5 to 10 years from now that have a great strategy and tons of capital. They don't have the people to implement. And you will have to be the preferred provider, not just across others in our industry, but across all industries at the price point at which you're recruiting. All industries. Culture is going to be absolutely key. Scale, secondly. I think with all the changes going on and the need for investment in people and in systems, it's scale at the local market level is going to be really, really critical. Now, you don't have to get scale by growing yourself. It can be through partnerships. But scale is going to be critical and going to be rewarded. Or put another way, it's going to be hard to play without scale. Thirdly, lower cost. This is not just to say the forgotten middle study that we released, that there's this huge opportunity in the middle market. Let me put it differently. If our industry is only seen as caring about rich elders, there will be hell to pay. And you will no longer have the freedom to just serve this market. You will have mandatory set-asides that you will just go, they're nuts. Well, if you don't want that, get engaged now in figuring out how we're going to solve the middle market. If we're not part of that solution, we will be punished by all the government entities that instead are trying to figure out what the heck are we going to do. And then lastly, customization, which I would really call personalization. It's taking massive amounts of data about the individual and about individuals like them, and then turning that into personalized health, personalized aging, in a way that enables the individual to be part of making those decisions, but empowers them with data to make decisions. So, winning culture, scale, addressing the cost issue, and personalization. So, thanks a lot. Hope this gives you just a few ideas to sort of think about as we talk through today and tomorrow where we're going as a sector. Thank you.